Hey, good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Reawaken Your Brilliance. I'm so honored that you've decided to join us tonight. So if you listened last week, my thought of the day was about my nephew Max, and because I'm the favorite auntie, I'm going to talk about baby Emma this week and then my other niece Claire next week, because I don't want to give up that status as favorite auntie and make sure I talk of all of them equally. So Emma is 2, and if you have a child or maybe are an auntie like me, you know that the terrible 2s come around. But I would encourage you to be like Emma if you can. What do you need to say no to? Because when Emma doesn't want to do something, she says no, and she says it loud and clear. And if she wants to wear a dress, she wears the dress that she wants to, and by golly, she's going to do that. So I think a lot of times as we get older, we overextend ourselves, or maybe someone steps on a boundary and we can't say no. So I want you to ask yourself either tonight or tomorrow morning, what do you need to say no to so you can say yes to yourself? So let's tell you about tonight's guest. Dale Allen Hoffman offers a living, breathing vision of many of Yeshua's, Jesus's, most misunderstood teachings from the ancient Aramaic language in which he spoke them. Dale shares stunning insights from ancient sources, including Aramaic, Greek, Hebrew, and Coptic manuscripts about the seemingly miraculous capacity of the human mind, our inherent divinity, and the awakening consciousness of humanity. He has been teaching spiritual insights from the ancient Aramaic language, culture, and wisdom of Yeshua for over 17 years and has been a contributing writer and featured guest for numerous publications, radio, and television. He is the director of the International Aramaic Healing Circle. Considered by many to be one of the world's leading authorities on the direct, practical application of the ancient Aramaic teachings of Yeshua, Dale travels internationally, sharing the rich spiritual wisdom which has been veiled beneath almost 2 millennia of misunderstandings, skewed translations, intentional manipulation, and a general lack of spiritual perception. So welcome, Dale.
Hello, how are you doing, Julie?
It's
awesome to be here.
Thank you. I am so excited to have you. Dale was kind enough to send me a DVD of his teachings called The Word, and I just was amazed. I was really blown away by it, so I'm really honored that you're here to talk to us tonight. So let's just start off right off the bat. What is Aramaic spirituality?
Well, it's kind of a terminology I came up with just to give a name to something that in a lot of ways didn't have a name. We don't think about the fact that Yeshua, who we of course know as Jesus, Yeshua is Yeshua is his Aramaic name, in his native language. We don't think about the fact that he was not a Christian, and he wasn't really a Jew either. He was fairly practicing Judaism, but not fully, and I come up with the Aramaic spirituality because what I'm doing is essentially teaching what Yeshua taught, but from the language that he actually taught it in, and to the best of our ability of research, from the perspective that it would have been more accurately understood 2,000 years ago rather than the way we think of things today. And in a lot of cases, it's almost exactly opposite of the way we think of a lot of the teachings today.
Well, I've been looking for you, Dale, because I have often said to people, you know what, I would really like to read a book about what Jesus taught, but that's from the spiritual perspective. And so until our friend Joy hooked us up, I'm just so excited about this. But I have to ask you, what led you to become interested in this, and where do you learn Aramaic? I mean, it's not like you can get a Rosetta Stone
not yet.
Rosetta Stone CDs and learn from there. So what was your interest? How did all this start?
Well, I mean, it sort of started just in the quick way. I was raised in the Methodist and Episcopalian churches. My grandmother was a pillar in the Methodist church especially, and I had very spiritual experiences with the Bible at a younger age, but it was never really like I was floored by the words that were in it so much as I had experiences that came through the words, I guess is the best way I can put it. And I would look at the words on the page, and I would literally repeat them to a minister or someone else in the church, especially sort of the hierarchy of the church. And I would make a comment about, say, what about this in Luke 17:20? And they're like, kid, what Bible are you reading? That's not what it says. And I'd look at it and go, oh, okay, wait a second. And I went years like that. It was in my 20s that, it was 1995 actually, that I met a guy that I had heard about for a few years, Dr. Michael Rice, who was, the workshop was, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And he was giving the insights of Yeshua from Aramaic. And it was a defining, he told me that he could have peeled me off the ceiling, because I came up to him during the break shaking and crying and laughing, and my hair was all on end, and I just said, this is exactly what I've been seeing and hearing since I was a little kid, and nobody understood what the heck I was talking about. I was like, this is it. And I just immediately then spent about 7 months with him at his teaching center, Heartland, out in the Ozark Mountains in Missouri, they say out there, and I just dove in head first with the experiential of putting it into practice, and then I started getting really deep into the scholarly aspects, and that was the hard part, learning pronunciations, and from recordings, people like Rocco Errico, George Lamza, and then it's like if you learn the Eastern dialects, the Westerners will say, Western Aramaic people will say, oh no, you're not being guttural enough, and the Eastern ones say to the Westerners, well, you're being too, you're not flowing enough with your pronunciation, and I just had to get it piecemeal, and I'm still, I feel blessed because kind of like someone that looks at English, well, if they came to English at the age of 30 or 40 or something like that, they would look at it differently than somebody that was raised within it, who gets sort of a tunnel vision, for lack of a better word. And I feel blessed in that regard.
So how many people would you say speak Aramaic? I mean, it can't be that many.
Anywhere from maybe a couple 100,000. It's hard to pinpoint at this point because it's growing so fast. In the Syrian mountains, there's 3 towns, Malula, Jubadan, and Baka. There's parts of Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, northwestern Africa, little pockets in India, little pockets even in China and Tibet that speak little bits of it, and it's sort of made its way into many other languages. A lot of what's happening in Syria today is very raw and personal to my heart. We don't even see on the news what's actually really happening there because they're not covering it, but those are native Aramaic-speaking people there in Syria. A modern Assyrian is a direct descendant of ancient Aramaic.
Oh, I didn't know that, because I wondered if it was still, because I always think of it as an ancient language, and I didn't think that anyone would actually be, that's what they grew up knowing. Yeah,
and it goes through lots of transformations, and probably no one is actually speaking the actual dialect that Yeshua would have spoken. The closest that we have is the Kurdistan mountains there in that region. They're the closest that we know of to the way that he would have spoke it. I lean in different ways in my teachings. I'm probably more Eastern than Western. An Easterner would say I was too Western, a Westerner would say I'm too Eastern, and I sound like I'm an American and whatever else, but I'm not so obsessive about the pronunciation so much as the vibration behind it. There's something about the assemblage of the words in Aramaic, in Sanskrit, in Hebrew, certain Lakota, there's certain languages that just light me up, and Aramaic is the one that lights me up the most. It really is.
Well, I would encourage anyone who's interested. Your DVD, The Word, was just amazing, and you talk about a couple different topics, but I kept having these aha moments when I was watching it. And one thing that you mentioned that I never knew, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said there are about 3,000 plus versions of the Bible sold in America, but in order for it to be sold, 20% has to be different content. Did I get that right?
In order for a proper copyright, yes, it's 22%, and that's the creepy thing I say is there's over 3,000 at that time. That video clip was a few years old, and I say there was over 3,750 on the market in the U.S. then. And I say, in order to get it properly, in order to copyright, it has to be 22% unique unto that edition, or you can't get that clearance through the U.S. Copyright Office. And then I make a joke in a way, but I'm serious too. I say, which one is the inerrant Word of God?
Right.
22% has to be unique unto that particular one. Which one is the inerrant Word of God? And that's everybody shoplifts from the King James in not from the Aramaic, but in modern Bibles, because the King James is public domain at this point, and so they can pull what they want from it and sort of swing it sideways. And there's so many Bibles, and I mean, there's people don't realize it. There's the golfer's Bible, the couple's Bible, the teenage Bible. It's almost like chicken soup for the soul in a way. There's all these different versions of it, you know.
So I want you to talk about. There are so many different topics we could go into, but you call it a living, breathing vision of Jesus' teaching. So can you talk a little bit about that and why you say that?
Oh, absolutely. And you made a really valid point when you said that I don't know if it was on air, I think it was beforehand, you had made the statement that you saw my DVD and you loved it, and you also said that your brain hurt. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I love to hear that. Not like I want people having headaches, but there's a certain paradigm shift to hearing, and it's not just the Jesus teachings in Aramaic. It's like if you go to true teachings from a true Lakota teacher, like someone like Joseph Marshall III, you go to something in the original language it's written in versus what we've been perceiving and sort of taking it for granted in certain, we think, okay, something means this. When you look at it in its original language, it really does come to life. In the Aramaic, it's funny because when I'm speaking to a crowd, especially if I've never been there before, I get to feel the energy. It could be 500 people, like Unity Church of Dallas. It could be 30. It could be 1,000. I get to feel the energy of people. I call it cork popping, where I'm up there, and I feel people. I can feel the energy burst when they're throwing their hands over their mouths, or they'll burst into tears. Or it was in Pittsburgh last year, Unity Church of Pittsburgh. I was talking. I don't even remember what it was exactly. And I just kind of gave it the Aramaic inflection and put it out there, and a woman just bursts into, like, belly laughter. And I stopped. And people are like, oh, my God, he's going to chew her out. And I was like, thank you so much. I was like, it is absurd, isn't it? It's completely absurd when you hear what something really meant. You know, a lot of those things that we've been questioning for years, in fact, it's not exactly what it really was. And I am careful, though, to tell people, I'm not telling you the truth. I'm just opening you up to a wider vision. And when you do that, you don't even need the Aramaic. You can look in the King James, and much like contemplative prayer, you're not seeking a mental concept of understanding, but how do I bring this in my heart? How do I breathe into this? How do I live this in my life? And that's what makes the difference. And that's the jewel of the teachings of Yeshua. You can take out one sentence, and you can chew on one sentence for a week, and it can completely transform your life instead of trying to plow through 30 chapters just to do it and not really having that living, breathing experience of what's really there. You're missing it when we're trying to do that mental dance with it because we can't get there through our mind. It's not even possible.
Talk about, and I don't remember what it was, I don't have it in my notes, but when you talked in the DVD, the word about breath and the word for that, and how in your translation that the breath, how important that is, and that's everywhere in the teachings that you translated. Yeah,
it's the core. The core of everything he taught was the word ruha. In Aramaic, ruha is that word that was translated eventually into Latin into the Greek as pneuma, which means underlying substance, and into the Latin as spiritus. Now, when we hear the word spiritus, which is spirit, we're thinking, if I tell people what is spirit, and people will give me all these great mental concepts, and they're it's almost like it's a concept that you can't quite get your fingertips on. It's just out of your reach. But if I say, show me spirit, but if I say, show me breath, all someone has to do is go, and that word that we know of as spirit that's all over his teachings in most Bibles, in Aramaic, it was not just spirit. It was actually more accurately breath. Mm-hmm. And you can actually go to, if you have go to a hotel and get one of those Gideon Bibles and take a pencil and scratch out all of the spirit things. I'm just kidding there, but scratch out spirit and write breath above it. And in some cases, it really did mean what we think of as spirit. But in a lot of cases, it actually meant breath. And when you add breath in there, it changes the scope of everything that he was saying. Like the first beatitude is not necessarily so much poor in spirit, lemaskene I baruch, poor as in lacking, but rather empty. And in that emptiness, that's where we find our true home, that first beatitude, that home and emptiness, which is a CD program of mine about the Beatitudes. And when I say home and empty simultaneously in breath as opposed to just spirit, what I mean by that is if you can find your home in your breath, and you are not seeking to do a mantra, you're not trying to accomplish anything other than just being, just literally breathing and being aware of it, being conscious. It sounds very Buddhist. And if you just sit with your breath and you allow yourself to be in that emptiness, you realize what that first beatitude was. You find your true home in your breath. And the first thing we do, if someone pulls out in front of us on the road, or we find out suddenly that someone was tragically killed that we love dearly, or the person that we can't stand jumps in front of us and blocks us from walking into a room, the first thing we do is we stop the breath, we stop breathing. And to just get the breath moving is the core of, it's the base of everything that he taught. It's the base of the entire system that he was giving us that basically was lost.
Dale, we have a question for you on the chat, and I want to remind our listeners you can Skype in at Computers 2K Voice if you have a question for Dale, and he's actually on our line tonight. Or if you chat a question, I will ask that. This is from Moses, so either good sense of humor or actual Moses. Who wrote the Old Testament and the New Testament? Why do we not have accurate Bibles?
Oh, that's a wide question. As far as who wrote, the list goes on. It's a long list. Nobody agrees. It's such a valid question, because if you pose it, and it's such a great question, because for me, I do my best not to put all of my eggs in one basket. Mm-hmm. You can go to certain scholars and they would give you a certain amount of, okay, this many people. You go somewhere else, they'll be like, well, this many people, and some will say it was these people that did it. Some will say it was those people that did it. The unfortunate thing is that nobody agrees. And there's certain things, like especially in the Pentateuch, in the original Hebrew Torah, before the rabbis were adding things like how do you wash your hands, how do you walk around the wash basin, all those kinds of things, that mathematically creates these amazing geometric figures. When you lay them out in mathematics, you can predict what the next letter is going to be. And there's other, something very sacred. There's other places, especially in the Old Testament and parts of the New Testament, where it's kind of just words. As far as accurate, it's another thing, too. And that's why I said earlier that I'm very careful not to say, here, this is the truth, this is what something really says. But rather, I'm just sharing from as much of what we know of an ancient Aramaic perspective. Even in modern Aramaic, things don't mean what they meant in ancient Aramaic. Even words that we have today, like, oh, that's terrific. We think that it's great, but no, unfortunately, terrific 50 years ago meant something was terrifying. And we say, oh, that's awful today. Awful, it's horrible. No, that was full of awe 75 years ago. And in terms of accuracy, it's a slippery slope, and it's not something that has a clear answer to it. What I do suggest to people is to just look, just keep looking and find what resonates for you. Some things are going to hit, some things will resonate and light you up. Other things are like, I don't think so. And find what it is that lights you up, what really gets your heart moving. And when you take a breath, things seem wider. Find those kinds of teachings. And unfortunately, we're sort of on our own in that way, because no one, especially in the scholarly field, no one agrees where it came from, the sources, when the originals were written, what, you hear, oh, it was originally written in Greek, and then other scholars are going, oh, was it? So it's just a very wide, sort of complex question.
We have another couple questions for you from Diana. One, she'd like to know, are the materials available to help you learn Aramaic on your own?
There's some great resources that have just popped up recently. You can actually go to Google and Google Learn Assyrian. Assyrian would be a modern form of Aramaic, and there's different programs you can learn Assyrian. You can go and see what the words and letters are and hear what they sound like online. But the amazing thing is that Detroit Mercy College, a lot of people don't know this, about 2 years ago, I guess it was 2010, started what would be called a colloquial Aramaic program where people would learn to speak basic base Aramaic. They started it, and you can do this online. It's the original, started in January 2010, and I think the one this year started January 17th. And it's an online course. Either you can do it at the church or online. I think it's like 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. every Saturday for a number of weeks, maybe 16 weeks or something like that. So if you just go and Google learn Aramaic, just put Aramaic in. I mean, people might not even remember to put Syriac, Assyrian, anything like that. But just put in learn Aramaic, and you'll find things. Rocco Errico has some books. There's stuff all over Amazon, but I will say learning out of a book is very difficult. It's very difficult to learn any language out of a book. You mentioned Rosetta Stone. It's completely changed learning languages forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's changed forever, that program. And we don't have Aramaic. There's Arabic, there's Hebrew, there's Swahili. There's all kinds of great programs through Rosetta Stone, but maybe someday they'll have Aramaic.
Well, maybe you could put that on your to-do list.
Oh, I've got enough on my to-do list.
You could, just trying to help you out there.
Yeah, and I'm less, and like I say too, I'm less about the language and more about expressing, what those older teachings say through the language. And I'm always learning, and I think that's the thing. I'm humble enough to know that I don't probably know hardly anything compared to what a native Aramaic speaker would know. So I'm very always in a sponge mode to learn more, and I have native Aramaic speaking friends that, like years ago I would be like, I would thought I said this really deep spiritual thing, and they'd be like, well, he just said the dog pooped in the grass. And it's like, oh, okay, wait a second. The slightest inflection, changing vowel sounds,
mm-hmm.
putting a k instead of a h, changes everything, like any language, but in Aramaic it's especially, words can mean empty and full at the same time, so it's a very simple language. It has not lots of words, but vowel sounds change everything, and the way you say things changes the meaning of a word. So,
well, we've got another great question from Diana. Some people think Yeshua was an Essene. What's your opinion, and how would you define an Essene? Great question.
As far as how I would define an Essene, let me start backwards. One of the things that resonates me the most about the Essene teachings is, and I get a lump in my throat when I say this, I really do, because one of the things that my focus is the most, especially right now in 2012, is to bring the feminine back to his teachings. And the beauty of the Essene teachings was that the feminine was there and it was balanced. And do I feel that he was an Essene? Absolutely. Unequivocally. I would say absolutely, and I'd scream it from the hilltops. The reason is because when I look at what we were told, looking at, say, the New Testament, just the canonical Gospels, and just the stuff that supposedly he said, the words in red, you could say, and I look at that in ancient Aramaic, it's very effeminate. And when I say effeminate, the way to describe that in terms of language, I'm looking at a book, and my perception of a book would be feminine, okay? The book itself is masculine in terms of language. Feminine means it's a perception, it's a state of being, it's an experience, it's an attitude. Something physical manifest right here would be masculine. And his teachings were literally, excuse the term, raped out of the feminine, which is the experiential, the direct experience, and put into the physical masculine, like something that you can gain or lose, or something that you can find in time and space, like the kingdom is a location somewhere, when in truth, kingdom in Aramaic is malkuta, ta genders it feminine, which means that it's feminine, it's spiritual, it's an experience rather than a location. And when I look at the Essene teachings, it's the femininity is all over them. And it's amazing to me because, I mean, when they talk about the word in the Essene Gospel of Peace in Book 1, in the translations how it talks about how the word can't be located on a page. The word is something that lives through you. And if you look at the word in Aramaic, the word is milta. Ta genders the word feminine, meaning it can't be the word that's written on a page. It's actually the perception, or it's you perceiving the word on the page. It's your experience of the word on the page that is the word in quotes. And that's something that's really important. It's not that masculine physical word. This is the word of God. That would be sacrilegious. That would be a sin to believe that something manifest can be the word of God. The word of God is what grows your fingernails. It's what wakes you up in the middle of the night with that aha, the amazing idea that runs you out for 20 years, helping millions of people with just one seed of an idea that came to you at 2 a.m. when you woke up in the middle of the night. The Word of God is holding a baby in the first 20 minutes of life. That's what the Word of God is, and we've lost that living, breathing vision because we're trying to find something physical. But St. Francis of Assisi said, what you are looking for is what is looking. In other words, that which you're seeking is that presence that is seeking through you. That's what we're meant to tap into, and that's the Word of God.
But do you also think it's man? I mean, what I love, as I'm learning from you, and I've read a little bit about the Essenes, is, I think with childhood growing up, and any time I'd question something in church, and not to pick a fight, because I was curious. I was a child, and that was dismissed, and we don't question that. And yeah. I think that Jesus rocks, but how most people see Jesus, and you can't do this, like, I don't, can use it to say you can't be gay because the Bible doesn't say so. And so I think there's this kind of patriarchal, I see a lot of hatred. And so that's something just immediately turns me off. And on your DVD, I had this aha moment when you brought up the point. I was like, oh my gosh, I was taught that God is omnipresent, but he's in heaven. So which is it?
Marcus Borg, he's got a great book called Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time. And Marcus, who's one of my all-time favorite scholars because he's got a humor to what he does, he says that when he was younger, he had this major problem that he ran headfirst into as a younger kid studying the Bible. One, that God was omnipresent, and two, that God was in heaven. And one great key to that is to understand that word heaven, which is actually my little girl's name. She's almost 9 months old now, and her name is Shemaiah. In Aramaic, the word Shemaiah is the word for heaven. Now remember, kingdom is feminine, meaning it's experiential rather than an actual physical location. And the word Shemaiah, that word or the sound ayah at the end of Shemaiah means something that has no beginning or no ending. In other words, something that has no boundaries. So if something has no boundaries, it can't be something that's actually physically manifest, because everything in physical manifestation has some kind of a limit, beginning and ending in time and space. And that's another revealer that heaven is literally a potentiality that's present everywhere. It's literally, when he said the kingdom is within you, in Aramaic that word does not just mean inside or within you. It means in your midst. It means threaded into the fiber of your being. When it says in John 1:14, although this is not the words of Yeshua, and it says, in the beginning was the Word, in the beginning of John, and in 1:14 it says, the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us, in the King James. If you look at that in Aramaic, it says, the Word, or that consciousness of life itself, descended into the flesh or came through the flesh and dwelt within or through us. That word amongst is the same word as inside, within, and through. That's something that's important for us to know, that the Word is not something, a man that walks around, but that the Word is literally that which lives through you. What you are looking for is what is looking, again from St. Francis. It's the key to everything, to understand that literally what Eckhart Tolle is talking about is almost exactly what Yeshua was talking about, and he's doing it in a modern way. And he has no knowledge of Aramaic whatsoever, and that's the amazing thing about it. Truth is just truth.
And we have another question from Moses on chat. And I want to remind everyone, if you want to call in, you can call in at 919-518-9773 or Skype in at Computers 2K Voice or chat, and I will ask Dale your question. So Moses would like to know, so who or what is God, and do you think Jesus meditated?
Who or what is God is not, that's something that each person finds for themselves. For me, wow, these are good questions, because
yes.
these are like off the charts questions.
I've got a smart audience.
Yeah, God to me is everything. This is another one of those things, kind of like where it's a mental, trying to find a cleaner word to think of that. It's like a mental self-stimulation for me to think that I can define God. And the greatest thing for me was understanding that when I tapped into the presence that flows through me, that I had that direct experience of what we would call quote-unquote God. And as soon as I tried to define it, the experience is dead. It's done. It's over with. So that's all I'm going to actually say about that. That's it's something that has to come through a personal, direct experience. And what was the other aspect of it? Did I think he meditated?
Yeah, do you think Jesus meditated?
Absolutely. And I can't tell you anything from the canonical Gospels that says that. Here's what I really, in all of the decades of research that I've been doing, and it's beyond even my gut now. My common sense tells me that he did go to the East, that he went likely to India, China, Tibet. They call him Isu. In Egypt, they call him Isa. And that he went there and picked up these spiritual philosophies that are breath-based. And it says in so many texts in Tibet, in Nepal, in India, that a man from what we would today call Israel traveled east, learned their techniques, those breath-based, almost Buddhist Hindu practices, and took them back. And it literally says to the Semitic-speaking people, and that they ultimately killed him. He tried to communicate it in a very simple way that they would understand. And ultimately it says that they killed him. It's amazing because, Greg Braden's done so much work with that over the last 20 years too. And I always recommend to people as a good crash course, because Greg doesn't play around. He doesn't go off into woo-woo land too often. To him, he wants something that's got true roots to it. And if you just go and get the Greg Braden audio collection, I think it's like a 7-disc set. You can get it for like $30 or something on Amazon. It's a good intro to be a part of that reality shift of understanding that our whole the whole image, Jesus didn't look like me with long hair or anything like that. If he would have looked like anybody, he would have looked like Saddam Hussein or Osama bin Laden. We've got to remember things like that. And that Eastern practice of meditation, to me, I don't see how most of those teachings could have come through him if he didn't have that conscious presence of meditation, of conscious breathing in his practice. I don't see how a lot of this stuff could have even come through. I really don't.
Can you give us a couple of concrete examples of maybe what we've been taught growing up, for people who went to a Christian church, I should say, of what have you translated that's different, that most of us were taught from the Bible growing up?
One of the this month, the February 2012, I'm featured in the Spiritual Cinema Circle, and they flew me out to Colorado as a subscriber of the month back in November and December, and I got to sit with Stephen Simon, director of so many great films, and he asked me that question. He's like, well, what's an example of that? And I said, well, the one that's one of the most profound ones that I've encountered that everybody knows is that phrase, love your neighbor as yourself. And people think, oh, well, that's an easy one to understand. And I'm like, well, it is, but there's so much more depth to that. That's in a few different places, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where he says, in Aramaic, love your neighbor as yourself. That word neighbor in the Aramaic, I'm not going to go into the whole phrase, but just a couple of key points. That word neighbor in Aramaic is kerub. Kerub means not just neighbor as in the person next to you. It literally means anybody that you think about. Technically, it means any object of your attention. Even if you stub your toe on a chair in the middle of the night, that's your neighbor. So anybody that you think about. So there's one little change. Love anyone that you think about as yourself. That word self in Aramaic is napsha, literal black and white linguistic translation of napsha is breath of life. So when Yeshua looked around and he saw, it's another word for soul also. Love your neighbor as your soul. Soul and self is the same word in ancient Aramaic. See, he would have looked around and seen not just souls or cells, he would have seen the breath of life breathing as you, breathing as me. So look at that phrase, without even unpacking the entire phrase, just changing those two words. Love anyone you think about as the breath of your own life. That completely changes the entire ball game. Instead of a mental perception of me trying to love you as I love myself, and maybe I don't love myself, but actually awakening the breath of life with everyone that I think about, everyone who enters into my consciousness, into my mind that I think about, including animals, including the earth, including anyone or any being, any part of manifestation, alive or not even alive, dead, not even created yet. And you hear that breath of life. Think about that. It changes the whole ball game. It's not a mental process anymore. Now we're talking about a very direct experience. And remember, the first thing that stops moving when you think about someone that you've got an issue with, the first thing that stops is your breath. And the first key that Yeshua gave us from the 10-step Beatitudes in Matthew, the first key was start breathing. Again, keep your breath moving and be empty in that breath, meaning you're not seeking a specific outcome. You're just being with your breath. And you do that, it literally awakens what he really meant by love your neighbor as yourself. So easy to forget a lot of those.
Oh, yeah.
It's easy to remember certain ones, but certain things like you can do all I have done and even greater things, oop, we forgot that. Or that in which you judge another, you are guilty of practicing, oop, we forgot that. Or the fact that he never said a single thing in the canonical Gospels about men with men, women with women. Paul said some things. Yeshua said nothing. Nothing
Right.
about it.
We have another question from Warrior Spirit on the chat. Based on the Aramaic version, why was Jesus killed and who killed him?
Well, it's kind of, that basically looks the same looking at it in Aramaic. And that's a great question, too, because like I say, I don't put all my eggs in any basket. I really feel that people should be informed. I think they should see films like Zeitgeist, especially the first one when you're talking about Yeshua. People should be informed to understand that the whole risen on the third day, crucified, dead and buried Son of God, all that stuff goes back thousands of years in cultures all over, especially the Near and Middle East. People should understand things like the fact that a lot of the stuff, what I honestly feel is that he was a guy who did travel to the East. He got amazing Eastern teachings, brought them back to these Semitic speakers. And one of the things that he was hated for in that time that we've got so much evidence is that he was teaching the sacred Hebrew Torah in what was called at the time the pig language of Aramaic, the language of the commoners. And he had these amazing ideas, and he ruffled feathers, and he was killed, and a lot of things were laid over top of that story after he was killed. It's funny, people will say, what did he really say? It's like, I don't know, I wasn't there,
Well, speaking of ruffled feathers, have you... have people gotten angry with you and said, hey, no, you're wrong. That's not how it is. We've had the Bible, and this is how it's been for 2,000 years. Yeah, I get them. I don't get as much anymore. The most memorable for me, I have a thing for that, too, to expand on that. I feel that they don't come to me so much because I've cleared so much of that stuff out of my consciousness that it's just not there to hook in me. And I have... people will point out bishops that'll sneak into my stuff or priests and things, and they'll go, look, and they'll be the first ones to leave because I think they feel
they're trying. I don't think they're so much checking out the enemy so much as they are opening, and they come in, and I think that some might feel threatened that I'm going to challenge them, and they won't have something to stand on because they're not sure and they're a little bit disoriented by the whole thing. And I mean, that's not what I do at all. But the one that I remember the most was a girl about 1.5 years ago who came up to me, and it was here in Asheville. Actually, there was about 250 people. And I was filling in for John and Barbara Waterhouse, the ministers at the Center for Spiritual Living here, and she was like, I don't understand. You're attacking Christians. You're attacking, and I'm like, well, what was it that you heard? I was in a very good space. I was very open, and I said, well, what were you hearing? And she said something, and one of the guys that was standing there was like, he didn't say that. This is what he said. And she's like, well, you also said da-da-da-da-da. And then someone else said, no, that's not what he said. He said da-da-da-da-da-da. And she said, well, shouldn't you be saving souls? And I said, saving souls from what? From what should I be saving them from? She's like, well, you should be, and there was all the lingo was going on. And then she said something that it still tears me up to this day. She said, you have to be wrong. And I said, why is that? She said, if you're not wrong, I have nowhere to stand. She's like, I am spinning right now. I have nowhere to stand. If you have to be wrong, because everything that I've built myself up to be in my life is based on these beliefs. And if even questioning these beliefs, my head is spinning right now, and I'll remember it forever. I will remember that forever. It was just this really profound experience for me where I could have felt threatened by her, and I could have taken a hostile stance and broken the whole communication down completely, and she would have walked off and said, what an idiot. But I was able to be open in that, and I'm not always quite so open. Sometimes, I might, sometimes it feels more like an attack, and it takes a lot more presence for me, but it doesn't really happen too often. And she really helped me understand that they're not really attacking me. They're disoriented. I mean, that's the 8th beatitude. Yeshua said, dislocated for righteousness' sake. Understand that when you're knocked off your center, you're dislocated for righteousness, dislocated for coming from the root of your being. Understand that you already have access to the kingdom of heaven. You already have that state of being in your consciousness. So understand that when you get kicked off your center, you realize that was not your center. Where I am right now is my center. And if I get kicked off this, I'll realize, well, it's not my center anymore. Where I am right now is my center. Wherever you go, there you are. Be here now. And I really got that. And maybe, I guess, I'm not attracting as much of that anymore because of that. But most of that stuff happens online on videos or something like that. People will post things, hateful things. And, I think it's, in some ways, I think it's great. It needs to come up. When someone contacted me a few years ago saying that I was on, it was either a Chinese or a Japanese website as a possible antichrist. And I thought, oh, my God, that means I'm doing something. And they didn't even know what antichrist means. It's the funniest thing. So, I mean, that means I must be doing something. Right or wrong, at least I've got people talking, right? So,
well, like I said, my brain hurt after, because you were forcing me to think about things in a new way, which was good. We have a comment from Diana who says, in my opinion, Yeshua angered the Jewish religious leaders who then got the Romans to charge him with sedition.
Yes. And
Spirit Warrior has a comment. What beliefs did the women in Asheville have that had her spinning, and who killed Jesus and why? Didn't hear your answer.
I don't know what her beliefs were. I wouldn't be able to answer that, but she was I do know that she was very fundamentalist, and that's kind of a very wide swath. She was very conservative. She was, I know her mother, and I didn't know at the time, but I knew her mother. I didn't know who she was at the time. That came out. Actually, I just gave them some Aramaic baby names for girls. She's pregnant, that girl is, and that all sort of came out later. I don't know what her beliefs were, but she was like praise worship, pretty conservative, fundamentalist, probably pretty far to the right. I mean, I live in the buckle of the Bible Belt, so even though Asheville itself is very accepting, we live together in harmony, the people who are open and the people who may not be quite so open, that white Southern Baptist, and I specify white, and this is a wide swath too, I'm not knocking Southern Baptists, but there's a huge difference between black Southern Baptist and white Southern Baptist. I think we get so intense about certain things, and here in Asheville, there's Pentecostal churches everywhere, and I don't know exactly what her beliefs were. That's not something I could answer, but it was definitely along those lines, because it was just the lingo that you get, just that, Jesus died for your sin, blood of Christ, and all that, and it was just that sort of same lingo that was coming out. But.
Now, Diana has a quote for you here from the Gospel of Thomas 2. Jesus said, "Those who seek should not stop seeking until they find. When they find, they will
become troubled."
Okay.
Sorry, I butted in. They will become troubled at one point.
Okay, yeah. Well, and when they are disturbed, which you're substituting trouble, they will marvel and will reign over all. And after that they have reigned, they will rest.
Absolutely, and that's the disorientation. That's one of my favorite quotes from it. Yeah, that disturbance, that troubling, that's getting knocked off your center. That's the eighth beatitude. That's when that's why I had so much of a welling up in my heart for the girl that said, you have to be wrong because I have nowhere to stand if you're not. And to me, it's not about right and wrong. It is about stirring it up and finding for me what it is that lights me up. And when I find what lights me up, I pursue that. And yeah, the Gospel of Thomas is one of my, honestly, I quote the Gospel of Thomas probably more than the canonical Gospels in a lot of cases. So,
if Jesus were alive today, what words of wisdom do you think he'd offer, and what do you think he'd think of our current state of affairs here in humanity?
Yeah, I think in terms of what he would offer, I think about that a lot. I think, what if I could boil it down to one thing? There's two aspects that I really feel he would remind us of two things. One is that the word for God in Aramaic is Allah, which means absolute only being, which means there's nothing outside of God, there only is God. And the other aspect is that I really feel that he would remind us, hey, breathe. It was all over what I was telling you, to breathe, get your breath moving, find your home in your breath. Understand when the breath stops, life stops. I really feel that, I think about that a lot, and I feel that out a lot, and I dream about that a lot, of if people pushed me against the wall and said, tell me two things, what are the two things? Those are the two, that God is all that exists. Doesn't matter what you call it, how you define that. And two, breath is the key to life. It's the key. What is a body that's not alive, quote unquote? There's no breath. There's no breath of life. Talk about
Satana.
Satana. He gave us a definition for Satana, Satan, and it's his definition. It's right there in the King James. He called it a being divided against itself, or a house divided against itself, or a city divided against itself. That good you and bad you, the good me, the bad me, that Yeshua and the three temptations in the desert. The word desert in Aramaic is madbra, which means not just a space in the wilderness. It was a code word. It also meant a raw, vulnerable, unprotected state of being, almost like you're being exposed, like that stuff you don't want out is like out in the open. And that word, it says that he was tempted 3 times, and some people say Satan, but no, it doesn't say that. It says he encountered the tempter. The word tempter in Aramaic, akil kartsa, what that means is that inner critic. It's the self-critic. It's your own shadow challenging you. Look, if you really think you're the Son of God, and we all get this inside of ourselves all the time, some more than others, some less than others, and we have to clear this stuff out. If you really think you're the Son of God, you're the one and the only, then why don't you stand up onto this, come on, let's go, up to the temple, on the top of the temple. The word temple in Aramaic is haikla, which means an embodiment of energy. Take yourself to the edge of your own body temple. Expand your consciousness so wide that you are disoriented and you don't know where your center point is anymore. Widen yourself as wide as you can get yourself and take yourself down, throw yourself down onto the rocks. Bring yourself down into the South Bronx, where there's people living on the streets, starving and crime. Take yourself into the deepest depths of humanity and stand up and walk away. And you can look at all three of the temptations like that. It's all things that were happening in his own consciousness. And there was never a Satan outside in the first century Aramaic teachings of Yeshua. That came centuries later. Dante's Inferno was the creation of hell. What we were told was hell back then was, in one case, it was the city trash dump. Gehenna was just the city trash dump. That's all it was. It was where they burned the trash. But when Yeshua would talk about that heat experience, he was talking about what we would know of as shame, or recognizing something that's inside of yourself that you thought was outside of you, and you eat it. When you've got to eat your own shadow material, it has a taste to it, and it feels disgusting, and you can call it shame, you can call it whatever you want to. That burning effect you get on your neck and on your face, that's what hell is that he was talking about. He was talking about consuming that darkness that's inside our own heart. And that's what light really is. Light shines on everything. If you look away, you're not being light, you're being dark. And that hell experience was that inner spiritual turmoil. And it has a sister word in Arabic. The sister word in Arabic is jihad from the Quran, inner spiritual turmoil. And then there's the lesser jihad that you would project out onto other people, which is what we would call jihad on you, the holy war thing. That's all inner emotional turmoil projected out. It has nothing to do with the will of God, in quotes. It has to do with our own shadow that we're blaming on everyone else and saying, my emotional upset comes to me from God, so I'm going to kill you for it so I don't have to feel it anymore. It's all smoke and mirrors.
We have a question from True Seeker. Very interesting. What is the difference between original Judaism and Christianity?
Well,
from what you've translated.
Well, I mean, the big difference really between what we would call, whatever Christianity even means anymore, I'm not even sure I know what it means anymore, but the big difference would be that most Christians believe that Yeshua was a physical Messiah. And in Judaism, the Messiah hasn't come yet. I don't put myself in either camp. People will ask me, what are you? What are your beliefs? You know, what they'll often say is, what is your faith? And, that's not a question for me to answer. I don't have an answer to that. I'm not any. See, that's the mistake we've made, is that we've created from his teachings, we've created this fence to live within. And we say that you're great, we love you, you're part of this family, so long as you stay within that fence. If you go outside of that, even though I know that everything that Jesus did we can do, and I know that everything that I judge in you is actually in me, but if you go outside of the fence, I'm still going to judge you, and I'm still going to say you're going to go to hell, and I'm still going to say that you're whatever, you're sinning, you're black, you're Satan, the devil is leading you, whatever. But in truth, Yeshua did not give us fences to live within. He gave us a beautiful, literal spiritual technology to tear the fence down, not to live within anything other than to live within the absolute only being. Forget the fences, forget the limits. He taught us how to be limitless. He taught us how to rip the fence down and not live within something, but actually have it live within and through us. He taught us how to awaken that presence within our own heart and literally to have life live us. And we're trying to live a life when life is living us. Again, I go back to St. Francis. What you're looking for is what is looking. And then, you're not going to find it in the material. It's literally who we are.
And something else that you had on your DVD, if you're looking for something, because this made me start to think about affirmations, and you talked about the guy who's got the Pinto or the crappy car and is like, doesn't my Mercedes look nice? But you said, do not doubt, do not separate. So talk to us a little bit about that, because I know people out here listening probably do affirmations, want things in their lives to change. So talk about that.
It's great because, I mean, when I ask people a lot of times, I'll say, what does doubt mean? And they'll go, well, second guessing. Yeah, that's true. And the word doubt in Aramaic is teplog, which means divide. So when he said do not doubt, what that really meant in ancient Aramaic was do not divide, do not cut yourself in half. And when we do affirmations, unfortunately, we're trying to use them to program ourselves. But that's not really what an affirmation is for. An affirmation is to make firm, not to put something in, but rather to affirm who you truly are. And what you do is when you affirm, if you say something like, I am loved, I am loved, I am loved, at first you're going to feel loved and it's all great. But then all of a sudden, it could be days, it could be weeks later, this unconscious material, these little dark bits are going to start rising up in your consciousness. Just like an iceberg, you're floating in the ocean, you're looking for God when you're actually made of God. But you have to melt back into God to realize that you are already that which you seek. You've just solidified yourself into me, Dale, this human being. And you use those affirmations and you say those affirmations and you live them and you breathe them, but you sit also, have those spaces where you're not trying to program yourself, but you actually sit with them in presence, and you can say something like, I am loved. And what comes up is, oh, I'm not loved. I'm disgusting. I'm a pig. And start writing that stuff down. Say those affirmations. Write it down. Get it out. We don't have to program ourselves to be perfect. We already are perfect. Mm-hmm. We have to drudge out the crap inside of ourselves that tells us that we are anything less than the one and the only in human form. The affirmation is there to pull that shadow material out rather than us trying to convince ourselves of something that in our core we don't really believe, because you can't do that. In order, like I say, don't think about Barack Obama. Who are you not thinking about? In order not to think about him, you have to think about him. The consciousness works like our consciousness is just like that. You try not to think about something, it'll eventually run you over, and then we get stressed out because our affirmations stop working, and all of a sudden it seems like our bank account's in the negative. It's because we're not shining the light where it needs to go. That's what affirmations are for, to affirm who I truly am and let anything else, like a wash tub and you've got corks there and you push yourself down into that water, all the corks eventually are going to fall out, but you have to immerse yourself fully in that water in order to experience that.
So Dale, what advice would you give to people out there who are listening, who are maybe struggling in their life right now? What words of wisdom and encouragement would you say to them?
You already are what you're looking for. And more important than anything else is meeting yourself. It's all inside you. There really is no technique that you need. Forget everything. Literally meet yourself. Sit down with yourself. Stand in front of a mirror and really get to know yourself. Look inside. At first, it's scary sometimes, and it's horrifying. And I was suicidal for years, not from the spiritual things, but I mean, it was in there, and that's all stuff I had to face. And I understood that whenever I had an issue with someone else, it really never had anything to do with them. It was my own thing. And when you start to do that, and take it easy, lighten up on yourselves. We're all trying to race to the finish line when, unfortunately, there is no finish line. We're already there. We just have to recognize that and live that. And it's difficult when you're in duality. And you're in, the world, we've got a choice. Either the world's falling apart or it's awakening. I choose awakening. Other people I know are choosing that the world's falling apart. Good on you, mate. That's not my path. But really, connect with your breath. Connect with your breath. Connect with your breath and meet yourself. Sit with yourself. Be aware of what's going on in your body. Pay attention to what your mind is thinking. Just watch. Just be aware.
That's great. Connect with your breath, because I was going to say, what one thing can they do right now or tomorrow morning to reawaken their brilliance, because I'm about getting off the couch. So I think connect your breath is excellent advice, because that's something that doesn't cost a dime and that you can do right now or anytime. Or like you mentioned earlier, that person that drives you crazy walks in the room and the first thing, catch your breath.
Yeah, that's so true.
Now, Dale, if people want to find out more information about you, do you have any books? I know I've seen your DVD, The Word, which was great. How can they find out more information about you?
My website is DaleAllenHoffman.com. The way I make it easy for people, go to Google and write Dale Aramaic, D-A-L-E, or Dale Hoffman Aramaic, and right at the top my website will come up, and there'll just be pages and pages of stuff all over the world, people loving or hating what I do. Look at all of it. It's entertaining. But my website will be right at the top, DaleAllenHoffman.com. A-L-L-E-N is my middle name.
Excellent. So you can find DaleAllenHoffman.com, and we'll have that up here on the site. And please also, I'm sorry, sign up
on
go ahead.
My mailing list. I'm always sending out free stuff, free MP3s, free video downloads, free printed things, free translations, everything, radio links, all kinds of stuff. I'm always sending out free stuff. So go on my website, and there's sign-up links for my email all over the place. So.
Excellent. And I want to remind for people that are in the Triangle area here, coming up on February 28th, we have a mastermind panel discussion on finding and attracting love. If you're longing to be in a healthy, wonderful relationship, or your confidence needs a boost, or we talked about Dale tonight about loving yourself, all the shadow parts and everything, and you want to learn more, please join us. If you go to reawakenyourbrilliance.com, you can find out more about this event, and the ticket price includes a free chiropractic and acupuncture treatment. It's a really good deal, and this has been sponsored by Delta Force Technology, so we would love to see you there. And Dale, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. It was a entertaining show, and I would encourage people to check out your site, and definitely the DVD, The Word. You will watch it more than once, I promise.
Thank you. I was honored, Julie. It's been good. And thank you to Joy. I know she's listening, for hooking us up. So.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Absolutely.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Sundays, 9 a.m. to noon. Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Mondays, 8 to 9 p.m. Reawaken Your Brilliance with Julie Seibert, Wednesdays, 8 to 9 p.m. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com.